The rest of the 8th chapter of John's Gospel, like the 7th chapter of John's Gospel, is spent dealing with legal issues. And John's whole point seems to be that whenever Jesus gets into a legal dispute against the Pharisees from Jerusalem, he always wins. He always silences them. They always come out at the end of those disputes not being able to do anything. Now, I think that John is trying to portray for the Celtic peoples of Asia Minor this Jesus who is a champion in justice. He is the one who is highly and deeply concerned about justice being done, which is a big thing within Celtic concepts. Justice is very important. So, as you look at those passages, you're going to see that predominance of the justness of Christ's case. And that's all John's doing there. He's just pointing out how just the case for Christ really is. It's not until we get into the 9th chapter that we have another event. And that event also moves into a justice issue. It's the event of a man born blind who is allowed to see again. He's healed of his blindness. Now, one of the realities here that Jesus is talking about is the nature of illness and the rightness of curing. There are a couple of unique things in John's Gospel. They see this man who has been blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents?" The popular Jewish belief was that sickness was the result of sinning against the law. That is, breaking one or more of the 600 and some laws that the people had. And when you break one of those laws, you are liable to get sick, or you were liable to lose everything you had. Something terrible was going to happen to you if you broke one of the laws. And that's how they viewed sin. Remember that Jesus in John's Gospel does not view sin in the same way. And so his response to that question, who sinned, is no one. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind for a specific reason. And that is so that God's works might be revealed in him. Think about that for a minute. That sounds awfully, dangerously like, well, God decided that this guy was going to be blind so that at some point in his life, Jesus could come along, heal him, and show God's glory. Sounds very suspiciously like that, doesn't it? Well, it sounds like that because that's what it says. Now, is that what it means? No. What Jesus is trying to say is that people are not ill because of what they did or didn't do. People are ill because they're human beings. And illness becomes an opportunity to show God's glory. Pat did not have thyroid cancer so that God could come along and cure her. No, she just had thyroid cancer because she's a human being and people get sick once in a while. We all do. But God can use even that illness to demonstrate God's love and compassion. That's what this passage is saying to us. That Jesus is using an event that is purely human in its nature. That is, God didn't plan it. God didn't punish with it. It just happened. And God now uses the opportunity to cure this man to show forth the glory of God. That's all it is. It's an opportunity for Jesus to act. Just like someone's illness is an opportunity for us to act on behalf of the one who is ill. So if someone is ill, what do? You make them chicken soup, or a casserole, or you go over and trim their trees, or their bushes, or mow their yard for them. They are ill, and that illness is an opportunity for you to be a friend. That is, to be someone who cares and is concerned, even as Jesus cared and was concerned. And so you go and you help out. And in doing that, you mirror the glory of God in your life. Jesus then also gets embroiled in a legal dispute because he does this on the Sabbath day. And so there's a legal dispute and there's a wrangling, and they bring in not only the man who was healed, but his parents to say, "Are you sure your son was blind? Or was he just faking it all these years? And if he was blind, then who healed him on the Sabbath day?" We want this character because he's not obeying the law. And they go into this whole legal tumult. Once the legal arguments are over, Jesus runs into the guy again. And the legal argument ends in a very unjust conclusion. The man is driven from the synagogue. Not because he did anything, but because something was done to him on the Sabbath. But since they can't pin anything on Jesus, they decide to get even. And they get even with the guy who was healed. And Jesus meets him and says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the man answered, "Who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." And the man said, "Lord, I believe." Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now you say, 'We see,' and your sin remains." That is, the sin of not believing in the Son of Man. In their sin, in their disbelief, they cannot see who Christ truly is. And therefore, they are blind. Not that they can't see the world around them, but that they can't see the Christ through whom that whole world was created. Interesting conclusion to a judicial problem. In the 10th chapter, Jesus goes into a long diatribe about sheep and shepherds and sheepfolds and gates and all of that. If you'll remember in the Old Testament, in the 23rd Psalm, or what we call the 23rd Psalm, the psalmist is talking about the Lord being the shepherd of his people. And Jesus takes that idea up and makes himself many things. He is the shepherd, he is the sheepfold, he's the gate to the sheepfold. However he wants to use that, he uses that in a purely unique way. Listen to this. "Very truly I tell you," that means listen up, folks, because this is true. "Anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. They know the voice of their shepherd." How many of you have ever dealt with sheep? Did that work for you, Bill?
Well, there is a little side note. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East where this type of sheep herding goes on, and to this day. And the sheepfolds are made of rock.
Yeah.
And the gate, or the opening to it, is roughly the same distance as the height of a normal man. And the shepherd, after he puts the sheep in the fold at night, lies across the opening and thereby becomes the gate. So when Jesus says, "I am the gate," everybody knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
In order to get inside, you had to go through him. So,
And that is borne out throughout this whole chapter. But the interesting thing is that the sheep know his voice. Now, the sheep that I've run into, the only voices they know are the dogs. They don't know the shepherd's voice. but they know the dog's voice.
Yeah.
But here, Jesus is using a strange old story out of the Celtic system about a shepherdess who herded her sheep using her voice. She simply said, "Come," and they all came. And that was it. Jesus, using his voice, pulls us. We know his voice, we hear, and we follow because we hear. For John, it is not all the wonderful things that Jesus does, it's the teaching. That's why there are more soliloquies in John's gospel than in any other gospel at all, including Paul. It is Jesus' voice that we follow. And so he spends an inordinate amount of time talking in John's gospel, and very little time doing in John's gospel. Goes back to that marvelous little frieze on an altar in France that depicts a Celtic god with fish lines coming out of his mouth, hooking the ears of people and hauling them along. People follow because they hear in Celtic thought. They hear truth. They hear reality. And so they follow. In John's gospel, that's what Jesus does. He talks a lot. So this whole thing about the sheepfold deals with that whole question of voice. No one follows a false voice. You follow truth. If you follow a false voice, you get caught up and you get yourself in trouble. You know, think of all the scams out there. You know, we tend to follow false voices all the time. And we get scammed time after time after time after time. But this is not a false voice. This is the true voice. Therefore, we follow him through this world and into the world of the Spirit as well. So that we, like the Christians in Jesus' time in Asia Minor, live in both worlds at the same time. Paul does that too. He's just not very good at doing that, but he does it. You know, do I speak with the voice of men and of angels? How can you do both? Because you live in both. So, you know, we see that mirrored sometimes in Paul, but this is what really is implicit in John's Gospel. It's that hearing that leads us into the world of spirit and eternal life. The 11th chapter, we get Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Again, Jesus does not operate out of emotion. Jesus operates out of opportunity. A certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And Mary was the one who anointed the feet of the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. And her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory." Just like the blind man, this is an opportunity to show forth the glory of God. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. You know, we don't often do that. You know, someone that we really care about, and we hear that they're not doing well, we want to be there. We don't want to wait 2 days and then say, "Well, you think I ought to go?" You know, we may be forced to wait 2 days, but when we are, we wait on the edge of our chairs. But Jesus says, "Not yet. Hold on. We'll be fine. Take it slow." Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let's go to Judea again." And the disciples said, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and you want to go back?" Well, yeah, because that gives him the opportunity to do what he always does. "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep," Jesus said, "but I am going there to awaken him." Now, they've taken a day to get where Jesus is. Jesus waits 2 more days and then takes another day to get back where Lazarus is. That's 4 days. The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll wake up." They didn't realize that Jesus was talking about his death. Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there, so that you might believe. Let's go to him." So they all go with Jesus back to the area of Jerusalem, back where they want to kill him. And Jesus arrives and finds that Lazarus has already been in the tomb 4 days. Now the Jews were quick to bury the dead, but not too quick, because they realized that sometimes you buried somebody by mistake. So frequently they would go and check. And the best way to check is just to crack the stone away a little bit. Not to open it, just a little crack. Because guess what? You can smell when somebody's dead for 4 days. Well, they had done that, and good old Lazarus is gone. So they say, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. But that wasn't the point. The whole point was that he was here now to show God's glory. And that's what people don't seem to understand. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her were also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. How much sense does that make to you? Doesn't make any to me. He's waited 2 extra days to go. He knows ahead of time, 3 days ahead of the time when he gets there, that Lazarus is already dead. Why weep now? Why be deeply moved? Why is his spirit troubled? Because of the disbelief that is happening around that tomb. No one there believes. When Jesus' heart is troubled or stirred or deeply moved, it's because he is in the face of sin. And that sin is people's disbelief, their unwillingness to believe what they've already been told. And so Jesus is deeply moved. He says, "Take away the stone," and they say, "Oh, you're in for a real smeller." And he says, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" They remove the stone. And Jesus looks upward and says, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always heard me, but I've said this for the sake of the crowd standing around, so that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And the dead man came out. Now here's the fun part. His hands and feet bound with strips of cloth. How else does he move? And Jesus very seriously and wonderfully says, "Set him free. Cut the cloth so he can walk, so he can move, so he can eat, so he can breathe, so he can live again." Jesus is not concerned with, "Now, did you see what just happened here?" He's concerned with Lazarus. Wasn't concerned that he was dead. Jesus knew what was going to happen. What he was concerned with is that he doesn't want him to die again of hunger. He wants the man to be free to live his life again. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what he had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we going to do with this man? He is performing many signs, and if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. The Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. Don't you understand that it is better for you to have one man die for the people than have the whole nation destroyed?" That's the plan. To save ourselves, were going to destroy the Christ. From that day on, they planned to put him to death. Jesus therefore no longer walked about openly among the Jewish leaders of Jerusalem and Judah, but went from there to a town called Ephraim in the region near the wilderness, and he remained there with the disciples. His public work is now done. He has two more public events that take place. His triumphal entry into Jerusalem, which is because of other people, not because of him, and his death. Those are the last two public appearances for Jesus to make in John's Gospel. The rest of the time is spent with his disciples and close followers, those who believe in him, and Jews. So he's out of the way of those who seek to kill him. And he's now dealing with those who seek to keep him alive. Both are problems. And we'll pick up with the 12th chapter of John's Gospel next Sunday. Chris isn't here.
He hasn't been here.